I'd like to begin by introducing myself. I'm Kirsten Feist. I'm the new scientific director of the O'Brien Institute for Public Health, and I am thrilled to be here today to welcome you to our Fall Members Forum, which marks the launch of the O'Brien Institute's Health Equity Hub. The University of Calgary, located in the heart of southern Alberta, both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. I'd also like to take a moment to reflect on what it means for me to live on this land, in the place I call home, where I live and raise my family, very close to Mohkinstsis, the Blackfoot name for Calgary, the place where the Bow and Elbow rivers meet. My personal commitment to reconciliation includes educating myself by taking courses and reading, supporting Indigenous artists, learning about the history of residential schools, and giving back to the land. Reconciliation involves parallel paths, but we will learn, walk, and grow together in a good way. I'd now like to welcome Elders Rod Scout and Cindy Daniels to our event and invite you both up to the stage to provide a blessing.
So my name is Cindy Daniels. I'm from the Stoney Nakoda. Rod Scout, I've been with him for 45 years. Throughout my life, I raised 12 kids. I had 3 biological kids. I lost my oldest son in 2011. And saying that, I was raised on the Morley Reserve. My mom is a one spot from Tsuut'ina. Her mom is a Stoney. Her name was Georgina Goodstoney. My dad's from the Stoney. His name is Dave Daniels. I lost my mom in 2021. She was 91. And I lost my dad in 2019. He was 103. So they lived a long life, and I'm glad the Creator, Ademakuchiga, gave me my mom and dad for a while. And that's a while. I got old with them. And they really taught me a lot. I was looking at the thing here, health. It's to do with health, and they talk about racism and addictions and stuff like that. When you look back on the history of our people, my people, it's not a good history. It's something that a lot of people don't want to see. Even my people don't want to see that because it's something that hurts. I never went to residential school, so I wasn't aware, but I know my older siblings did, and my mom and dad, but they never talked about it. My great-grandmother from the Stoney side, she never went. I don't know how that happened. I think they probably hit her or something, but she never went to residential school. And that's where most of the teachings I got was from her. She was I've never ever heard her raise her voice. I've never ever heard her being, she really treated people with dignity. She was very kind. And when she talked to me, when I did something very bad, naughty, she would talk to me. I think the mic's out, is it? Or is it just me? And she wouldn't talk at me. She would talk to me, and she would ask me why I did what I did when I was being naughty. And she was different. So in learning what she taught me, I really liked what she did. She was a healer. She made her medicines. She would heal people with their ailments, and she would doctor people, and she would pray for people. She would do ceremonies for people that were going through stress or all kinds of things that were happening in their lives. She would do it. And that's who I learned. I used to go see her because I had, there was like 9 of us in our family. So I had 5 sisters and 3 brothers, or is that 8? My math is really terrible. And so I would go stay with her. When you're in the middle of lots of sisters, you want to go stay with her. So I would do that. I'd go stay with her whenever I wasn't at school, and she taught me a lot. Her English was terrible. There used to be a trading post near the railroad tracks. We used to go there and get our flour and our sugar and whatever we need. And she used to say, I want to go visit my younger brothers and sisters. And I used to wonder, these people that ran the trading post, they were Asian people. And I used to, how come she says that? I said, and I really kind of didn't bother. I said, okay, so we go there. She'd visit them and pick up her flour and sugar and whatever she needs. And then later on, as I got older, I would tell her, Gushin, why do you call them your younger brothers and sisters? He said, because they're our brothers and sisters. We're the older race, and we have to teach them. It's like your younger brothers and sisters. If you don't teach your younger sister or younger brother, then they're not going to know these things. You need to teach them. So she taught me to be a teacher at an early age. And the way she was a teacher. And she didn't speak English, so she just speaks Stony to them, and they just smile at her and give her tea. And it's like she was having a conversation, and they just keep smiling at her and nodding. So she, in her way, I guess she had that communication with them. But she never, ever had a racist bone in her body. I never, ever saw her being racist to anybody. That's how I grew up. And that's how I grew up my daughter. My youngest daughter is 33 years old. When she was really young, she came home and she told me, Mom, you didn't tell me I was an Indian. She said that, and I thought, oh yeah, I didn't tell her that. I told her she was Blackfoot because of her dad, and I told her she was Stoney Nakota, but I never, ever said that to her. And then she came home and she told me, and I said, oh yeah. And so I explained to her. And then I told her, no, you're not an Indian. I told her that. You're a part Blackfoot because of your dad, and you're part Stoney Nakota because of me. Labeling and saying the proper, I guess, word to things to describe something is very important. In this day of reconciliation, you got to really watch. What is reconciliation? I always ask myself, it's just a word unless you put action to it. It's just, that's all it is. It's just a saying, a catchphrase. So I'll say a prayer, and then Rod can come up and say, Ha demakuchiga nini tawan kinizabi chaku hadashin wasa chaku ne ambane ne hebine demakuchiga nini tawan winchastabines chandiza ginizabi chaku hadashin nini tawan Baktasa shigawana dashin unchigiza town chase dashin chigibashi say wahain chiniga nangi chabichen naga nago in chana chacha snish.
Me? Okay. Tough act to follow. Or as Rodney Dangerfield says, what a crowd. What a crowd. So I guess a little bit about myself. I was raised by my grandparents as well. I was a mini puka, or kipite puka, old people's child. I never really had any formal, I guess, Christian learnings. My encounter with Christianity was when I was forced to be baptized as a Catholic. And then later on, when my dad wanted to quit drinking, but he wouldn't go down by himself, I got baptized as a Mormon. Didn't work. But in growing up, my grandparents were, they were the ones that went underground with the ceremonies and the bundles. They were elders for the Horn Society. They were elders for the beaver bundles, medicine pipes, ukan, and the tobacco planting. Plus brave dogs, motukik. So they were pretty well elders for all the societies in the Blackfoot culture in the Confederacy. My grandmother was hidden from the missionaries in the early 1900s. We estimate that she might have been born before 1900. So she never spoke English all her life. So when I first went to school, I remember the nuns, pardon my French here, but kicking my ass because I didn't speak English. But, I learned. Reconciliation is actually, like, she stole my line, as a matter of fact. But it's just a word unless action is taken. And it's practiced every day. Sometimes, You can also be make racist, be racist by being too nice. Sometimes we just got to be treated like human beings. You know, we're nothing special. I'm nothing special. But, you know, we've lived our lives, and for me, I've always had an affinity for learning about cultures. I mean, when we were kids with my cousins playing cowboys and Indians, I was always the medicine man. I don't know why. Everybody else wanted to be Hopalong Cassidy or the Lone Ranger or, you know, Clint Eastwood. But me, I always wanted to be the medicine man. I don't know why. But later on, you know, in my journey in life, I ended up, you know, being captured by the horns. Perfectly happy with my life, but cost me a lot of money because I was constantly getting cleaned off because I was still a police officer at the time. So I've seen a lot of death. In our culture, we don't celebrate death. We celebrate life. And we talk about health equity, it's the same thing. How do we bring life? How do we make life better? You know, that's where all you brainiacs out there will, you know, figure it out. Without being too patronizing, hopefully. But, you know, health is more than one thing. I always use the term holistic. Not with an H, but with a W. Whole, the whole. Or in our language, nita pitapis, meaning to be a real person. You know, it's a lifelong job for all of us. It took me a long time. And like I always say, I always thank the E-Fry ladies because they taught me how to care. Because I had developed my defense mechanism so good that after a while I could do things without any feeling. I was very methodical, very mechanical. I was a major crimes investigator when I was in policing. I was also with ERT. So I did all these things. You know, more than once I've had to point a firearm at somebody. I've had to take down people at gunpoint. I've had to defend myself. And I hate to admit it, but I have hurt people. But I didn't lose any sleep over it because my defense mechanisms built up over 20 years in policing and other various fields that I was in. You know, it made me very hard. So in getting into that, you know, my culture, my wife, you know, they taught me to be human again. And every once in a while, you know, like yesterday I did a speech and a presentation to the Association of Professional Communications Officers at the convention center yesterday morning. And they almost made me cry because it brought back some emotions for me. And I had to kind of take a pause and, you know, for me, it's, you know, everything that I've bottled up inside over the years, you know, they call it PTSD. But it's not bad now. I'm good. I'm okay. No, just kidding. Yeah, I don't hear voices anymore. But every once in a while, it comes up. So I want to welcome you all into the territory of the Siksika-Itsitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy. And like I always say, you know, we've been here for a very long time. Genetic archaeology has shown that they can go back 55,000 years in this area. Our creation stories, a lot of them happen here. Like the ladies, I took them down to the women's buffalo jump. And in our creation, it plays a very big part because that's where Napi first introduced man and woman. And he ended up snubbing the most beautiful one. And she turned out, she cleaned up nice. And long story short, she ignored him, even though in his scheming he wanted to set it up where he can get a wife. But he ended up with nothing. He got mad and stomped his foot, and his footprint is still there. So in our creation stories, this area plays a big part. Just over here, where Fort Calgary is, where the bow and elbow meet, that's where we got the term muhkinstis. Muhkinstis means elbow in Blackfoot, because it's in the shape of an elbow. That's why in our sign language, when they say, "Where are you going?" we go like this. It means going to Calgary. So this area plays a very big part. This was a trade route through here. We used to trade with the coastal people. I remember being over there a few years ago, and everybody was shorter than me. But they confirmed, because we used to trade them pemmican buffalo robes for dentalium shells, and sometimes for the salmon. So it was a fair trade. Where the animosity between tribes came from was during the fur trade era. When people ask me, when did the opioid epidemic start with the native people, I said, well, I can speak to here. It came from first contact. When we had the whiskey traders and the traders come up here, they used to lace the liquor with laudanum, which is an opium derivative. And the more they give them, the more addicted they get. And that was one of the biggest contributors, not only to the smallpox blankets or diseases, but that was one of the biggest contributors to the people, the tribe shrinking. At one time, they estimate that there was over 100,000 Blackfoot, maybe more. One big camp, they counted 1,600 lodges. So if you estimate 5 to 10 people per lodge, let's take a middle number, 8. Then you multiply that by 1,600. That's how big our tribe was at one time. Following year, they counted 600 lodges. A year later, it was down to 300. That was from diseases that we had no immunity to. Smallpox, the flu, measles, the common cold. We had no immunity to it. So in a sense, when the church gave out these blankets, that was the first, in this area, known case of biological warfare against the people. But on to more sunnier things. It's just a brief history, because if we don't come up with that, if we don't bring that history up, and like Al Gore says, it's an inconvenient truth. But the more we know, the more aware we are, the more that hopefully things will get better. Reconciliation is just a word unless we take action. Health is just a word unless we do something. My wife and I always talk about things, and we've talked about, even in what we do, we have to be healthy. We have to take care of ourselves. Because how can we be effective if we're not healthy? Physically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, or things. Those are things that we always need to be aware of and to take care of ourselves. But we have health, and we should be glad. We're breathing, we're living. You know, I'm just winging it right now, but these are things that we need to take care of. For us, our people, you know, one time, Narcissus Blood, the late Narcissus Blood, we were talking, and I told him, if you ever drew a line around, we were sitting in a classroom, I said, if you ever draw a line across, that represents thousands of years of existence in this area. And then you have a break, probably the size of a pinpoint, representing 125 years at that time. And then the line starts again, just a dot right now. And I told him, just in that 125 years, we lost language, a lot of culture. Some tribes lost everything. Languages in North America. There's one tribe in Manitoba, they're Nakota. They only have one speaker left. The South Piegans in Browning, out of close to 80,000 people, 16 fluent speakers. One died not too long ago. On my reserve, there are speakers, but they're dying out too. You know, that's health plays a lot in language. My worldview is different. I don't look at things from a colonized worldview. I look at it from a traditional worldview because that's how I was raised. I'm lucky. At one point, I didn't think so because when I first went to school, I didn't speak English. So the nuns would kick my ass, along with the school bullies. So I learned to speak English, and I learned to speak it a little better than them. And they thought that I was being didactic and condescending, but I wasn't. I just learned to use big words. And I still got my ass kicked. So I learned very early on that you can't please everybody, but the work you do, that's what matters. The work you put into it, your equity, that's what matters. You know, I've been married 45 years. I paid good horses. I gave my father-in-law some really good horses. I did. Boy, I miss those horses. So. But, you know, the thing about my wife and I, we've had a long journey together, a very good one. She's not only an elder for her people, but she's also an elder for the Blackfoot Confederacy. She's considered one of the most elite elders in the Confederacy. She's the one that brought back Spiatawapi to the North Blackfoot, to the Siksika. That ceremony and that transfer, when we done it, was the first one in 60 years. Nobody else had it. So when they say, which bundles did you own? Oh, also we transferred 12 bundles as owners in the Horn Society. And when they ask her, which ones do you own? She can say, all of them. When they ask me that, I say the same thing. I own them all. As my late uncle Pete, standing alone, once told me, because he gave me all my transfers, I said, so how should I go in? He said, you can go in backwards if you want. That's what I have. So without further ado, I'd like to offer a prayer for you guys so that everything will go good. You leave with good knowledge and leave in a good way. Ayonap. Ai napi natus. Ai ko komikisum. Ai piswatsas apachti piswatsas. Oki kititkhona sinautspa nuustumi. Nistuanna kai ni maatukkaatuaps, ni tega kukkitautkhtai maatsimu ihkan. Oki nuksin nikkakkikoksakkinnaanaa kiinukkaksiistsikkuye. Oki nakisi tamai uhkanukpinnaanannuum, aapuham umuuhsinaaki. Ai kimmaa tuukinnaanaaki spummuukkinna, kukkinnaanaaki mukaksini. Oki, aapuhkaaki akitkonorpumikkia piuaki. Ihtais sinan, itihkueminnaaniksi aapuhkaaki makaapsa, oki istiistumiaapi, kannistkai. Kimmisauaa käkisi taamaisaa kai pihkitsimiauannika. Oki spummuukkinnaanaaki. Annuksaksi awatsipstuumia sukinakiapi. Oki kimmisauaki kutisauaki mukaksini. Oki akitkiapi skatuumia kanäsukaapi. Oki kanaukaksini. Oki kanautista piitsimaan. Aio kimmisauaki spummus. Oki kanautuu iksaaki. Aio nakitan sikkinaut kaihpinnaanaan sikkinaista pumahkahpinna. Oki ksahkummiitapi. Kistuanna kai kitsakuuain iskataaki. Oki kistuanne kitaskistumattuupaani tsikkitstannaan. Oki nistunaan kimattaskistumakkipinna. Kanääkistikusaaki tsitohkitaapuakahpinnaan kuustumi. Oki nakitseitäisahkakkipinna. Nakitseitästoukaspinna. Nakiteitaamitukitaapuakahpinna. Oki issuhtsikaaki. Käkisi taamaskistumakkipinnan. Aio kimmukinnaan spummukinnaan. Okin. Nää piusin. Kaamutaan supukita piusin. Niistä vatsimaan anja. Quick translation. Kind of got used to it praying at court, but I pray that everybody will leave here with knowledge. Will leave here in a good way once you're finished. And have that compassion and caring. But you also, that you'll see your loved ones again, so that you can put your feet in the new grass in the spring. But also, that as we walk on the earth, that we'll always walk in a good way, that we'll not stumble. But we all leave here with a good heart. We leave here with good things, good knowledge. So you can arrive home as gently as you left, and that you get to see your loved ones again. And that someday when we go back to the earth, that we go there in a good way. Kian, thank you.
Thank you very much, Elder Rod and Elder Cindy, for starting our event off in a good way. So health equity and the Health Equity Hub are integral components of both the O'Brien Institute strategic plan and the new strategic plan of the coming School of Medicine. We are committed to moving research into actual change, whereby everyone has the opportunity to be healthy and have access to the health and social care that they need. This means using evidence to change social and health policies, to minimize disparities, and to ultimately improve health and well-being. Our goal is to become national leaders in health equity research and system transformation. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kanine Osei-Tutu to the stage. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Osei-Tutu, who is a hospitalist and associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine. He is the inaugural Senior Associate Dean, Health Equity and System Transformation at the Cummings School of Medicine. He is well established as a provincial and national leader in change and transformation. The founder and president of the Black Physicians Association of Alberta, he elevates the voices of Black physicians, trainees, and learners. He informs the development of policies, educational programs, and curricula that are inclusive, and has established partnerships with regulatory and licensing bodies to advance health equity. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Osei Tutu.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that warm introduction. And thank you to Elders Cindy and Rod for really centering us in the importance of this work and reminding us that this is about real people, real lives, and real opportunity to do better in the future than we've done in our past. I do want to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, and that the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I also want to state that I recognize that we do land acknowledgements in place of land that was taken. And to the point of what the elders said, this has to be much more about that. It has to be about action and what comes forward. And so I'm honored and excited to be speaking to you this morning as we celebrate the launch of this Health Equity Hub. This initiative has been the realization of Dr. Mullaney's vision and desire to make an even greater contribution to the world. And it's a tremendous step forward in a shared commitment to promote health equity and address the widening disparities in our community. And I want to express my deep gratitude to all of you for your dedication and passion in making this vision a reality. As mentioned, I'm new in my role as a CSM Senior Associate Dean in Health Equity and Systems Transformation, and my portfolio is excited to work closely in partnership with the Health Equity Hub to advance our shared initiatives. But as we've heard from the elders that spoke before me, health equity is not just a goal. It's a fundamental human right. And I know I'm perhaps speaking to preaching to the converted, but it's about ensuring that every person has the right and the opportunity to attain their highest level of health, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, or any other factor. And it's on that backdrop that I think we should take a further moment to reflect as a community here and ask ourselves, how are we doing? If we're doing well, how can we do better? If we're not doing so well, what are the barriers for us moving forward? And how are we going to do that together? We know that First Nations people in Alberta wait longer for care and are triaged with lower acuity scores when they present to the emergency departments. And so how are we doing? We know that First Nations people die in care at disproportionate rates or have been killed by lack of care, secondary to racism and neglect. And so how are we doing? We know that in our LGBT plus communities, there are high rates of mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, and substance use, and that evidence shows that the LGBT plus community and those with intersecting social identities face an even heavier burden of health disparities than other communities. And so how are we doing? How are we doing with the knowledge that Black patients who present to the emergency department with a psychiatric illness are placed in physical or chemical restraints at disproportionately higher rates than white patients? And how are we doing when we reflect and say that couldn't happen in a pediatric population, and we look at the data and we see that Black and Indigenous children are more likely to be placed in physical restraints when they present to the emergency department? Did anybody see the Barbie movie? Hands up, hands up. Good, good, good. If you haven't seen it, see it. I thought it was actually a really great movie. I took my daughter to see it. She's 11. My wife wouldn't take her because she didn't want to endorse, the whole Barbie thing. But I thought it was a really profound movie in a lot of ways. I thought it was had a lot of empowering messages for women and for men. I thought Ken was a bit suspect, but what was the first thing that Barbie did when she decided to cross from the Barbie world and go into the human world? Anybody remember the end of the movie? Say that again? Correct. She went to see her gynecologist. And that's really profound in many ways. It tells us that there's something deeply human about that experience. It tells us that she had that privilege of being able to go to see her gynecologist for validation of her womanhood. And she felt safe in doing so. And that was a movie. It's the reality for some, but it's not the reality for many women today in Canada, still. Indigenous women, Black women, other racialized women who don't have or are afforded that dignity and care. And I think that's just something to reflect upon in terms of the opportunities we have moving forward. So achieving health equity requires a multifaceted approach involving not only healthcare providers, but also researchers like those of you in this room, community leaders, policymakers, and individuals from all walks of life. And the establishment of this hub is an opportunity to advance meaningful change through research, innovation, and collaboration. And hopefully this will serve as a nexus for interdisciplinary collaboration and a vehicle for transformative change. This is tough work. Everybody in this room is involved in really tough stuff, but this is also a deeply meaningful journey, and this is part of a purpose-driven life. So as we set out to address the complex and interconnected issues that impact health and well-being and communities, we must continue to recognize the urgency of this work and to sound the alarm that this work is urgent. There are many other competing interests in the province right now, and it's important that this opportunity to continue to sound the alarm on health inequity doesn't get drowned out in the larger conversation. So part of the question I think we need to ask ourselves this morning is, can we harness this energy? And if the answer is yes, we can, then how will we do that? We have to bridge the gap between research and action, which is what we're here today to do. I believe that we have to believe that we can do it to achieve it. I think we must continue to center the margins in order to liberate the masses. If we work collectively together, I do believe that a rising tide raises all boats. And I'm inspired by all the people in the room, the passion that you've all brought to the table. I think collectively we can really do something special together as a community. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning.
Good morning. My name is Katrina Mullaney. I am sadly the outgoing Associate Scientific Director for Population Health with the O'Brien Institute. I want to say sincere thanks to Dr. Osei Tutu for your welcoming words. You set us up in a really great way for our next conversation, so thank you for that. I do want to say a special thank you to Elder Rod and Elder Cindy. I was one of the lucky people that joined you at the Women's Buffalo Jump for that wonderful day, almost 2 years ago now. And we've had the pleasure of working together a lot since then, including spending last week on Vancouver Island with our partners in Victoria. Alpha House was there, and Caitlin from the Aboriginal Standing Committee is really the lead of that work, and Elders Rod and Cindy were there, Laura Nixon was there. We had other elders, and there were many people from the Aboriginal Coalition and University of Victoria there as well. And we spent an amazing day on the land on the West Coast and have had some really fantastic conversations about our two communities and how we work together, how we're unique, but how we were all the same as well. So it is really truly an honor that you were here today and that you opened us up in such a great way. And anytime I get a little bit nervous, there's 300 people that registered for this event, by the way. I'm always reminded of why we're here, and you always help me do that. So big thank you to you for being here. As I may be introducing our first panel, I'll just say a few words about the Health Equity Hub so that we all sort of start from the same place. But I'd really like to welcome Caitlin Lucas, Heather Morley, and Nicole Jackson. Sorry, there's two Nicoles here that I know, Nicole Jackson. Please come up and make yourselves comfortable, and I'll just set us up for the first panel conversation that we're going to have. The Health Equity Hub really started actually before COVID with a lot of work we were doing at the O'Brien Institute around structural vulnerability and structural barriers and all of these sort of disparities that we see certain groups of people face in my work for no fault of their own. Really, the fault is with the people with the way that we have organized our systems and the way that policies govern our service delivery. And I often say, you know, our health system and our social systems work pretty well for people like me because they were designed by people like me. And I think if we flip the lens and we start from the perspectives of people who are highly marginalized because of homelessness, because of race, because of racism, because of poverty, because of sexism, because of bias, if we designed our systems from that lens, our systems would be phenomenal and they would work well for everyone. And so that is the vision that this hub came from. And the purpose of the hub is to create a space or a platform for people who have an interest in doing that kind of work, either as researchers, as service providers, hopefully as decision makers, because it just creates an opportunity for us to think and do things differently. And so what we want to do this morning is talk a little bit about some of the work that the hub has been involved in, but more importantly, our partnerships and the people that we work with and their experiences. So most of what you'll hear between now and lunchtime will be from people who are not UCalgary people. They are these wonderful partners and collaborators that I've known for many, many years. And we also have a fantastic panel of young people who are working on a youth homelessness prevention project who will come up a little bit later. So let's just start maybe with an introduction. I have formal bios for you, but I also have a personal relationship with all of you. So Caitlin Lucas is a Métis woman who's been working in the Indigenous community for the past 20 years with a strong focus on homelessness and vulnerable populations. Caitlin has engaged on many levels from frontline to leadership. She's the executive director of the Elizabeth Fry Society. So when Rod was talking about E-Fry, he was talking about Caitlin and her organization, and as the co-chair for the Aboriginal Standing Committee on Housing and Homelessness. Nicole Jackson is the strategic lead of impact and evaluation at Trellis Society. If you don't know Trellis, formerly Boys and Girls Club and Aspen, we probably don't need to say that anymore, right, Nicole? It's been a while. Rebranded as Trellis Society. Her work at Trellis has focused on mobilizing data to better inform program design, service delivery, and systems advocacy for vulnerable youth and families. Nicole worked in research and policy analysis in the homeless serving sector with me. We worked together for many years. For 10 years, and did a Master's of Public Policy at our very own UCalgary School of Public Policy. Heather Morley has proudly served as Executive Director of In From the Cold since April 2019. She's responsible for providing overall leadership direction and oversight, ensuring that the Inn fulfills its mission and meets community and stakeholder expectations. Heather brings decades of experience in advocacy in the social services and homeless serving sectors across Canada and the US. The focus of her work has always been supporting families from crisis to stability. So we have you here this morning to hear about you and your organizations and the work that you do. I have a few guiding questions. So just to say, Heather and I first met maybe 15 years ago. You were at the YWCA. I was at either United Way or Calgary Homeless Foundation. We've worked together in many capacities since then, including current projects between the University of Calgary and In From the Cold, looking at the housing issue for families right now and some of those barriers. Caitlin and I also have known each other probably 15 years or more, again, from the same sort of time period, and we've done a ton of projects together, and the project that we are doing with our friends in Victoria I could talk about it all day. It is one of the most rewarding projects I've ever worked on, and I've learned so much in that work, primarily around harm reduction and culture, and the tensions between alcohol and culture, which, if you can imagine, are very complex. And like I said, Nicole and I met many, many years ago. We were both sort of in the early days of our research careers, I would say, worked at the Homeless Foundation together. And so being able to maintain those relationships, coming to the University of Calgary is just such a huge gift for me and for our work. So that sets us up, I hope. I'm going to sit with you if that's okay. I guess this is a good time to see if these mics work. Are these mics working? Okay, fantastic. So let's just start. I'll just turn it over to each of you to just say what you would like to say about yourselves, about your organizations, and then we have a few questions. So we do have a timekeeper. We have 30 minutes, and there will be time for questions and answers. There'll be a couple of mics out on the floor if people want to ask questions of our panelists. So do you just want to start because you're right beside me, Heather?
I guess that's right. I'll start. Good morning, everyone. I am very pleased to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity. Sometimes I'm amazed. It's been 30 plus years for me, as Katrina mentioned, across Canada and the US, and the focus of my work has always been women, children, and families. And I think always guided by optimism and the possibility of change. And I have worked in frontline clinical and leadership capacities. Many of you may know In From the Cold here in Calgary. We have a 25-year history of supporting families who are experiencing homelessness. And so currently we operate out of a location in downtown Calgary where we have an emergency shelter for families. We always say there's 3 pillars to our work, that important continuum from prevention and diversion, keeping families housed if at all possible. If there's no other option, and I do mean that because I always say that the last place a child should ever be is in a shelter, we do operate an emergency shelter for families. We have been running at full capacity for as long as I can remember, and we typically have 30 adults and probably 60 kids in our shelter at any given time. And then we also operate housing programs throughout the city. So on any given night, there's probably 120 families under an In From the Cold roof. We are a low barrier shelter. We are a low barrier organization. We serve the most marginalized families who really and truly have no place to turn. And it's about supporting them from that place of crisis to stability.
Good morning, Oki, Tansei. My name's Caitlin. I'm from the Treaty 6 area, a visitor in Treaty 7. Just also like to thank Elder Rod and Cindy for their beautiful prayer and words this morning. My paid work is the Elizabeth Fry Society and Restorative Justice, but I'm going to talk about my unpaid work that I've been doing for probably about 11 years now as the co-chair of the Aboriginal Standing Committee on Housing and Homelessness. And our work is really pivotal because our work is primarily in research, advocacy, and education, and trying to incorporate more genuine approaches and practices of working with Indigenous people who are overrepresented in the homeless sector, as well as addressing the stability of housing, which we know is a problem across Canada right now. I'd like to say that one of the highlights to this work is actually working with students, and then of course Dr. Katrina Milani and Dr. Lara Nixon. It's been a really pleasure to work with 2 individuals who are super humble about the work that they've come, and they've been with our committees for a number of years, but they've come to learn and to educate themselves, but not to appropriate our knowledge, but to share and to give their knowledge in a way that's really important for us to be able to accelerate the work that we do. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My background is actually from the unceded Coast Salish territory of Vancouver Island of the Wasatch Nations. Arrived in Treaty 7 around 2012. Did my graduate degree at the School of Public Policy and I have arrived at this work consistently from a research and evaluation lens. Early in my career, realizing that the frontline social workers and youth development folks can only bang their heads against the wall of bad policy and bad governance for so long, where we need an additional sort of cohort of people doing research and advocacy and policy recommendations so that we're moving things along at a frontline level as well as at a systemic level. I currently work as the strategic lead of impact and evaluation. That's our research team at Trellis, formerly the Boys and Girls Clubs. We run, similar to my colleagues here, a whole spectrum of programming for vulnerable youth, children, and families. At our organization, that looks like everything from family resource networks and preschools and after-school care. We operate Calgary's only youth emergency homelessness shelter and run Housing First for Youth, as well as additional programming for young people involved in the child welfare system, transitioning to adulthood. It's quite a gamut of services. And our team is collaborating with the university regularly and doing our best to understand how we can work most effectively for the young people and families and community members that we serve.
Thank you. I can't get close enough to the table, so I'm just going to sit. I feel like I'm sitting really awkwardly, so if I look like I'm uncomfortable, I am. So I have these questions, but I'm actually going to just go off script a little bit because I just want to sort of build on something that, a theme that sort of came from your conversations around working with the university. And so, you know, I think I would like to think that we've had some fantastic experiences working together, but I would like to hear from you about maybe some experiences you've had with researchers or academics that didn't go so well. And if there was something, you know, not everybody here is from University of Calgary, by the way, so there's lots of community folks here too, but I would really like to hear a little bit about when things didn't go quite the way you'd hoped, or when the project went a little differently than you thought, or when you wished things would have gone differently. You don't have to name names. Only if you're comfortable.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to go? Oh, gee, I get to start out with the negative. Well, we started a research project a while back, and it was a collaboration between the City of Calgary, the University of Calgary Aboriginal Standing Committee. And our first researcher that we hired didn't seem to really get the process, and unfortunately they were non-Indigenous, which I think made a big difference in the approach that we took. And unfortunately within maybe the first 7-8 months that we had to part ways because it wasn't going the way that it should. And so we brought an Indigenous researcher in, Dr. Gabrielle Wieselfat Lindstrom, and it just shot off at that point, and it was a really excellent research project that we're now actually in a process of CMHC coming back to us and asked us to submit for a potential award on that research. So it could have went down a really bad path, but there's some really good people that were involved with it. I see Megan Bell here. She was a part of that research as well. And but this one researcher, he just couldn't parallel the Indigenous worldview around that project.
I remember. Yeah. Anybody else?
I can jump in. You know, I always say, Katrina, when you call, I pick up the phone. And, you know, we've worked together on many projects when I've been at various agencies. And for me, your experience having done the work so well informs your research and your approaches. And so that's why I appreciate and always pick up the phone. And because I think you understand the work and the experiences of the people that we serve at a visceral level. And that's important in terms of how it informs the work. And so there's some folks, or some people, I don't pick up the phone quickly for, to be honest. And I think that, I guess what my thought would be is sometimes what doesn't go well is just speaking as a nonprofit, service provider, we're all busy, but we're really busy, and we tend to work in a very crisis-driven environment. We are strong advocates for the people that we work with, and I always talk about, having worked in shelters for much of my career, how so many of the folks arrive at our door with the cast of thousands. They have baggage and luggage, literally, and so much that they are coping with. And then they have, probation officers and caseworkers and therapists and, teachers and people and, everybody, courts, everyone that they're trying to deal with. And then in the middle of it, we'll get, hi, we want to do some research. Could we take 3 hours of, your people's time? And I think what we always talk about is they're so, and reporters do the same thing, by the way, not just researchers, but everybody wants, of course, to hear the story, and they want time. And and the folks that we work with have so little precious time and dignity left. And so it's all in the approach. So I would say that when things don't go well, it's often that initial approach and then how they're going to approach the project or the research. And when it becomes too much of a burden for our staff, who barely have 2 seconds, and then especially for the people with whom we work, that's often where we've got to draw the line.
Yeah.
And say no.
Thanks, Heather. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I think similar comments to Heather as I was making notes about too slow, that there is this sense of real urgency in nonprofit work. A collaboration research project we did with Katrina on a project pilot we did called the Boreal. Between when that project began and when it ended, we were studying a cohort of 22 youth. We had 4 young people die in that period. And there was this sense of it's just so urgent. And yet also this real understanding that it's always urgent. And so in some ways that's not the reason not to do it, but it is this real challenge around setting aside time. And then also to Heather's point around ensuring that our research assistants and the folks talking to our clients are able to be trauma informed, to be non-exploitative, to create safe space, and do all of that important work so that we're not furthering harm, so that we're truly walking alongside the people that we serve and elevating their voices and bringing them forward to these new spaces. Yeah, and I'm sure people in this room can appreciate that the research pathways in terms of research with marginalized communities are quite varied, and so we're working hard to move forward in a good way with our folks.
Thank you. Now, all of you are engaged or have been or will be engaged in research with the University of Calgary. So do you want to talk a little bit about some of those partnerships or some of your experiences working with the university, or why? Why do you even want to? Why do you want to do research with us, and what is the sort of value of that for you?
You can start.
There's huge value in research. And, for me, what I've seen through the years and have collaborated with, many universities and in lots of researchers because of the dearth of research around homelessness and families. And so I think it's a way for us that when we know better, we do better. And speaking as someone with a background in social work, and I think we all know the origins of, those helpful people that just knocked on doors and said, hi, I think I know what's best for you. The importance of research so that we can understand and do better. I think good research gives the people with whom we work the opportunity to have their voices and their experiences raised and highlighted. And they are often voices that aren't at the table. They aren't people who often get the opportunity to speak directly to the academic community, to decision makers, to policy makers. And so research helps them. It helps us advocate as well. So I think those would be my main points.
Great. Yeah, I think for us, the Aboriginal Standing Committee, we wouldn't have some of the opportunities if we weren't partnering with the University of Calgary. But I think one of the critical things that has come out of our collaborations together is the fact that we don't want this just to be a dusty document on a shelf, that we're trying to leverage the recommendations that come out of all the research that we do and then take it to maybe another step. It might be more research, or it might be program development or service structure or practice that's informing community. From the standpoint of the Aboriginal Standing Committee, we're not here to create programs for us to operate, but we're here to inform community about how to deliver practice in a way that has an Indigenous worldview and in an authentic way. And I think some of the highlights to the current project that we're working on with the managed alcohol program with Victoria and U of C has been the idea that it's really driven by elders and culture. It's not driven by an academic worldview, I guess, but there's benefits to it too, because there's teachings and learnings around particularly harm reduction from that Indigenous lens that has really started to inform lots of practice in community, as well as lots of opportunities for further research around evaluation frameworks that will lead more to that concept of healing people, like not looking at constantly at us Indigenous people as what's wrong with you, we need to research that, but what are the basis of the culture that can really expand the opportunities for our people to get out of these systems being overrepresented, as Dr. Tutu mentioned, is that we're really overrepresented, not just in health, but in justice, child welfare systems, all of those. And part of that is if we are doing proper and appropriate research through an Indigenous lens, that we can empower people out of these situations and have our people become, empowered to do better in our lives. Thank you.
I think at Trellis, one of the huge value adds we see with U of C is this sense of a neutral sort of third party entering into the work. There is sort of a feeling of endorsement when we can go to our stakeholders, go to government, and present both as Trellis and the University of Calgary. I think there is this sense that we have had this critical third party come ask tough questions as a kind of shoulder-to-shoulder partner in the work. It actually adds, in some ways it takes capacity, in other ways it adds capacity, right, to have these critical conversations. And it's often complementary to internal research and questions that are asking. So there's this meaningful connection between staff who have wanted to talk about this and wanted to move something forward, and university partners coming to join us to sort of lend their voice to that mix. I think one of the interesting areas that we've gotten some traction lately is around research that leverages administrative data. At Trellis, we've got an unbelievable volume of data on a wildly large number of participants, and through artificial intelligence and some software engineering folks, and partnering again with kind of some unusual suspects at the university. We've been able to do some interesting linkages in terms of identifying, if a young person is in a program for more than a year, that's sort of the threshold at which all these other risks kick in, and we can actually map that out in terms of administrative data, which really reduces the burden on clients, right? That research actually never asks questions of clients in some moments, because the power is in that linkage and in the volume of that data set. So that's been an interesting kind of recent evolution.
That's really cool. I've just been given the notice that it's time for Q&A, so I have 17 more questions, but I guess I'll stop. Thank you, all three of you. Fantastic. We have two microphones, Leslie and Brittany. Put your hands up if you can see. Yeah, Leslie and Brittany. And if you have a question, please just put your hand up and they will come to you and bring you a mic. We have Karen right up front.
I could probably have used my teacher voice.
Probably.
Karen Benzies, Faculty of Nursing. Nicole, you said meaningful. I'm working on social innovation, strengthening partnerships with community. Could you just tell me what a meaningful and sustained relationship with a university partner might look like?
That's such a great question. I think primarily meaningful is a co-informed. So I think historically there has perhaps been an experience of both social workers, nonprofits, and universities going to marginalized populations, potentially with an agenda, whereas it feels like we're in this meaningful sort of co-informed, and we've got these groups that are establishing research agendas that cross agencies and cross departments at the university as well. And so there is this sense that we're also including the client voice in terms of what all could we maybe collectively move forward. Sometimes government is in the mix as well. And so then instead of sort of an extractive orientation, there does seem to be this like group project vibe to it that I think helps us all advance the work forward, but leveraging our individual strengths. There is stuff that the university can say that we cannot say. And likewise, to be candid. And so having the ability to work together strategically, looking at our goals, I think has been meaningful.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. Other questions? Oh, there's one in the back.
And there's
I'm going
right
to stand up.
I see it in the corner. Hi.
Hi. My name is Salma, and I work with Dr. Turan Chaudhry in the field of immigrant research especially. So one thing that we talk about in this context is conducting research in a community-engaged way. So I know that all three of you work with vulnerable populations. So in your view, what does community engagement mean to you, and how can that be used to create better partnerships for research in the work that you do?
Well, I think Aboriginal Standing Committee, it's all community driven, and we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without community members from our tables participating in this work. And we really go from like the stories and the oral traditions in building out our research. It's very co-developed, and it's also driven by community in a really meaningful way. And of course, we utilize ceremony, we utilize the auspice of lived experience in these conversations as well. So I think it's about again, stepping back as the academics are stepping back and they're participants in the research versus, hey, we're leading this research. They're allowing community to do that.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, that was the perfect
You're okay?
answer.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Yang Yang. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Community Health Sciences, working with Dr. Tiffany Bolton and Dr. Joanna Rankin, and Dr. Katrina Mullaney was my PhD co-supervisor. So I'm very, very excited to be here at the launch of the Health Equity Hub, seeing lots of familiar faces as well. I wanted to first thank you for this panel, and also thank you to Trellis and Inframood Cold, who are our research partners on our project, the Radical Mental Health Doula Project. And we'll be presenting a poster later as well. So thank you for that engagement. My question, kind of riding on the meaningful engagement and that participatory action piece, is what can we do, what platforms, opportunities do we as researchers potentially have in partnership with you to bring back the knowledge that we have co-generated with the people in your organizations and with the people that we have gathered these stories from. I feel like a lot of the times the knowledge gets translated in venues like this or in publications, but what are some of the ways that we can actually be sharing those stories back in terms of what it is that we believe we found, right, from gathering those experiences?
I have a hot take on this. Okay. Knowledge mobilization, we're all about it, we love it, we want to move things forward in policy and government and with our communities. I think fundamentally the knowledge mobilization that most impacts communities is when the research and advocacy makes the thing happen. The project that Katrina and I and others collaborated on evaluating just got 2-year rolling funding, which means that a pilot that got researched now I think will operate it in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. And when I think about fundamentally what the difference research makes for the young people involved in that project, the difference it makes is that the program continues, or that the program operates better, or there's additional funding, or expansion of services. I think in a lot of ways, from an academic standing, I know there's a a desire to talk about and share and process together. And I think that the clients that we serve are often so present-oriented by nature of their experiences that luxury often passes them by, or is the timing isn't right, that kind of thing. And so for me, the best mobilization we can do is following that process all the way through to an implemented different service experience and ultimately exit from systems for the people that we serve.
Anybody else?
I think the other thing is using our local research. This is something that I keep on saying to individuals who come to do research with my organization, is that their stuff has already been done. Don't start from the beginning. Utilize what we've already done and leverage that. And I think the other part of it is being, again, a collaborator. One of the things that we learned through some of the processes of the various research projects was the elders were saying to us, why do you keep on coming back and asking the same questions? Because different researchers were asking the same things over and over and over again. And that really actually led to some really meaningful collaborations between existing researchers. While they were doing their projects, they've leveraged their projects upon other projects that we're consistently working on and moving forward. So I think it's sometimes, and maybe I'm in a room full of academics and I'm not one, so, but taking the ego away from the work that you're doing and come from it in a humble place, and it will be more meaningful.
I think I'd add yes to what both of my colleagues just shared. And I think sometimes it is amazing the way research, the small and the big can make a big difference. So thinking of In From the Cold, where we work within the homelessness sector, we work with families facing homelessness, and yet we know that term homelessness, there's a whole lot underneath there. And so thinking back to the research that you did, Katrina, back in about 2017, where you looked at mothers' experience, and that was one of the first, and I still pull that report out all the time, one of the first reports looking at mothers' experiences of homelessness, and one of the big findings, and the way you broke out that paper too to talk about policy recommendations, was around domestic violence and that interconnectedness, and that we know one of the major pathways into homelessness, particularly for women and children, is domestic violence. And the inn to that point hadn't paid much attention. We were just, I think, focused on the label, this family is homeless. And so then what it led for us to do was a shift in our practice to better screen in our intake process for domestic violence and broker stronger relationships with the domestic violence shelters and domestic violence service providers. Because what we have found, and in fact I just had somebody working on a project and she had just spent some time interviewing both staff and families, and she came out and she said, you're a domestic violence shelter. Like 100% of the families that I've just interviewed, they are fleeing domestic violence. And so then how does that help? That helps us elevate the issue for our funders, for donors, and then for us as service providers, what we need to do differently in our service provision.
Thank you. How's our time, Jamie? One more question?
I'm Xiao Xiao, a geographic information scientist within the primary healthcare program, Alberta Health Services. So thank you for the panel to share your amazing work with the University of Calgary on those research projects. So over so many years, there has been so many research projects working with researchers and other partners. So my question is, among so many projects, how many of them has been successfully transitioned from research to applied in community practice, transition from research to action? What's the roughly percentage? If the percentage is low, what are those barriers? If it's high, it's successful, then what are the facilitators? Thank you.
Good question.
I was looking at me. Yeah. I would say with the Aboriginal Standing Committee, 100%. And if we don't have an actual product on the other end, we're working on that product. So a lot of like the research project that Heather just talked about, that was in collaboration with the Aboriginal Standing Committee, and one of the things that came out of that was the absence of landlords. And so we talked about developing a landlord network. So that's actually a project that we got some funding for, to create a landlord network to deal with Indigenous peoples that are vulnerably looking for housing, for example. So that's one of it, and Heather mentioned the domestic violence view of that particular project. So I think if you can utilize research in more than one way, that you're actually leveraging it, and it might even just be another project to leverage the first project like we are doing with MAP. We have another proposal out to look at the evaluation framework from the programmatic perspective that we're just working on currently. So I think 100%, yeah.
I think it's perhaps unknowable in the sense that when I think about research projects at Trellis, the threads that take them out into the community are so, there's so many. So often this work gets taken to conferences where other nonprofits in other cities may take the program model, right, and pilot it at their site. In other cases, that might build a research case for a certain policy direction by government, or an additional, policy or research review. So I think there is a sense that in some cases, when researchers come to us, the knowledge mobilization plan that's part of the research project feels very immediate, and in other cases, it's much more theoretical research. And I think organizationally and sector-wide, we really are invested in moving both of those lenses forward. I think there's a temptation to prioritize, programmatic advances because that's the world that we live in. But I think we, as a sector and a nonprofit community in Calgary, are also trying to be part of that right national and global voice in terms of our learnings and willingness to sort of partner to advance, capital K knowledge as well as really applicable program stuff.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's very few turkeys. There is always a thread. I love the way you put that, Nicole. Yeah, there is always positive outcomes. Sometimes maybe not what we expect, and they have long legs. And so, always grateful to partner around the research.
Amazing. Thank you, all three of you, so much from stepping away from your very busy lives to share your experiences with us. I just am so appreciative of the work that you all do and that your willingness to partner with us. We don't always get it right, but we're learning as we go. So thank you to all three of you for being here and sharing your experiences. Thank you. I am very excited to introduce to you, maybe while I'm just introducing the project, I can ask Elijah, Caitlin, Claire, and Megan to come up and grab a seat, please. Thank you. So what we hope to do with this conversation is introduce a part of our research team that is working on a national youth homelessness prevention project. And this project was initiated by community agencies in several communities across Canada, actually. So again, Trellis was our lead here in Calgary. We have 4 organizations in Ontario that work with youth in homelessness and at-risk youth. And we have 1 organization in BC as well. And the idea for this project came from these community organizations who are working with young people. And they typically, historically, access to a youth shelter was very much about if they call or they show up, welcome them in. We'll take you in. Please come in. We'll take care of you. And what a number of organizations were finding is that maybe that wasn't the best approach. Once a young person enters homelessness, their experiences can get very difficult very quickly, and they can become entrenched in street life, very high rates of risk for violence and exploitation. And so the folks working in these shelters said, we need to do something differently. And so the paradigm shift that happened in terms of service delivery and interventions was, instead of just saying, yes, please come in, they spend quite a bit of time from that first contact finding a place for youth to go, to stay in housing that is not a shelter. And so that's actually a really complex process. But what these organizations were finding, there were 3 or 4 across Canada that were collecting their own data and doing some anecdotal reflecting on this intervention. And they were able to show that they prevented homelessness for 40 to 60% of youth that came to shelter. So this is huge because all of those complexities that can get worse while you're in homelessness, there's a stop gap to that now. And a part of the intervention is then to build supports in the home, whichever home that is that they go to do whatever they can to stabilize that situation and help that young person stay in that housing. And so they approached us here at the university to say, can you help us with a piece of research that takes what we're seeing anecdotally, puts some science around it, some evidence around it, so that we can really understand, are we actually preventing homelessness for these young people, or are they just showing up, 3 weeks later or 6 months later? And we have such fantastic data in our shelters now that is individual level. They can actually tell when young people are coming back. And so our goal is really to get that 40 to 60% to 80%. And our job is to look at how these programs are operating across the country. We are doing interviews with young people and their families. We've done 75 interviews so far. We have a goal of about 200. We'll see if we get there. Recognizing that each community is different, the resources that they have in those communities are different, and so whatever program model we decide is the model, we need to be able to adapt it. And a big piece of this, well, what do we need to create to ensure that an organization anywhere in Canada can take up this paradigm shift and this new model? So that's the gist of it. It's obviously a lot more complex than that, but I'm very, very happy to introduce part of our research team because it is national. What we often do is we will work with the community agencies in those cities, and they decide who to hire to do the research. Many of them hire their own staff, and we do some research training. They have that sort of orientation to the issues and to the young people, which is a really hard thing to teach. And so they come with that orientation. So a lot of autonomy is happening in each of those organizations across Canada, and then we sort of hold the pieces together here in Calgary. And so the team that we have with us today is our Calgary team, and we have Elijah, who has a PhD in social work and is one of our research team members and is the chair of our committee of lived experience experts. We have Megan, who also has a social work background, works at Trellis, and is part of our research team. We have Claire, who is right beside me. Claire is doing her master's with us at University of Calgary. She's a research team member, and her thesis research is looking at the experience of homelessness and pregnancy from the lens of medical education. So what do medical students, what do medical professionals need to know from that experience to support people in a good way? And we have Caitlin. And Caitlin is a PhD student with us, and Caitlin is doing fantastic work looking at current provincial policy around recovery-oriented systems of care from the experiences of people who are surviving opioid overdoses in a very community-engaged way. And she's also our project coordinator. And so I'm actually just going to stop there and go sit down and turn it over to the 4 of you to talk about anything you want to talk about in terms of your experiences working on this project, anything you want folks in the audience to know about the work that you're doing or about yourselves. So thank you very much for being here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. So we're just going to start with a brief round of introductions. Does anyone want to volunteer to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
As Katrina said, my name's Claire Feasby. My pronouns are she, her. I'm in my second year of my master's in community health sciences with a specialization in medical education. And I'm working in a research assistant capacity for this project. So practically that looks like interviewing youth and staff and natural supports, doing some coding. We just got back from a conference in Halifax for the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness Conference. And yeah, that's me.
Oh, sure. My name is Megan. I use they, them pronouns. I was brought onto this project through Trellis. They asked me to support as a research assistant, so doing the same work that Claire is doing. Given my work experience with youth and my time spent working in the homelessness sector, I'm currently completing my BSW, my Bachelor of Social Work, at Mount Royal University. And yeah, that's me.
Elijah?
Hey, Oki Tansei, hello everyone. My name is Elijah Ermine Neal. It's my English name. And my indigenous name that I received in ceremony and followed Cree protocol is Pisamuyapi Miskananapio, which translates to Rainbow Turtle Man. And I share that with you because it guides a lot of my work and the teachings that I receive from that name, guide a lot of my work and stuff. And I will correct Katrina, I only have an MSW, so I'll be humble enough to say I didn't do the PhD yet. But I do have I did do the clinical Masters of Social Work program at U of C a few years ago and specialized in trauma-informed care and did a lot of work with Indigenous and indigiqueer and racialized queer students in academia. So I did a film documentary, letters and lessons from an academic indigiqueer for my indigiqueer students coming after me. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome, thank you everyone. And my name is Caitlin. I'm a second year PhD student having the privilege of working under the supervision of Dr. Katrina Mullaney in community rehabilitation and disability studies. So the next question is around sort of why we've agreed to work on this project and what we're sort of enjoying about it the most. So does anyone want to take that on?
I
or-
can jump
yeah?
in quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of agreed to this because Katrina's my supervisor. No, I'm kidding, but I mean, she is my supervisor. But no, I mean, this is actually one of my first formal research projects that I've ever worked on as a master's student. So it was a great privilege to be asked to work on this. And it really actually helped inform my thesis project as well. I knew I wanted to come in and do something super fun and feministy in medical education. And then I really fell in love with working with youth and working with youth who are experiencing homelessness, and saw some really profound connections between some of my interests and this research project. And so that's kind of what brought me here. But yeah, pass it over to someone else.
Yeah, I don't know whether you want to go jumping back,
Yeah.
and forth or what, but I can go. Katrina's also my supervisors, but I think one of the biggest reasons why this work resonates with me, and I lean back and forth whether I share this in such a public format, but in 2007 I lost my brother to suicide, and it took a lot of years for me to sort of work through what that meant, but also I've gotten to the point where I can sort of zoom out and see the intersections of substance use and mental health and intersecting oppressions and all the ways that our systems didn't work. And so coming to this project, once again, when Katrina calls or emails, you always respond. That's a life lesson. And so I really wanted to be part of a project that not only mobilizes research to, tangible action, but also that can really improve the lives of youth who are struggling.
Yeah, Katrina is not my supervisor. Yeah. No, I got involved in this project through the work that I'm doing in the community and within the homelessness sector. And so part of why I wanted to join this is it's true when Katrina calls, you say yes. But also, a lot of the frustrations that I was facing as a frontline worker, as a case manager, supporting youth who are experiencing homelessness, comes from systemic barriers that we as case managers face, that our youth are facing every day. And so my hope with getting involved in research is understanding and exploring how we can change systems to make it more accessible for our youth, how we can prevent them from entering into these systems to begin with. And yeah, this was just a really great opportunity to learn from these lovely people on the panel with me who have a little bit more education than me, but and yeah, also explore what does change look like at a more systemic level instead of just this person-to-person approach.
I'm a two-spirit storyteller, so I only know how to speak in stories. So why did I come to this project? I was actually trying to remember that, not because I was questioning it, but just the time that's gone on and everything that's gone on in my life. In 2011, I was a very different version of myself, looked different, had a different name, fit in a different side of the room, on the different side of the forms, you know. And I ended up living at a program called Haven's Way that was at the time being run by Boys and Girls Clubs of Calgary. And from 2011 till 2014, I lived there. And I entered that home as an at-risk girl trying to finish school and struggling with homelessness. And I was 18 at the time, so I'm 30. You don't have to do the math. And so that's when I entered a homeless serving program for youth and began my journey of the last however many years. But I ended up having a long-standing relationship with Boys and Girls Clubs, which eventually became Trellis, and I still have a relationship with them. As a youth, I lived there. When I finished, I started my social work diploma in 2014 at Mount Royal, and it was quite an interesting space to be at the end of being a service user and coming out of this program that now, okay, I'm going to social work school and I am not homeless, I'm an adult now, those kinds of things. But I didn't successfully leave homelessness forever after leaving that program. And I, over the years, got to be a volunteer at Boys and Girls Clubs. I did my Bachelor of Social Work practicum with their housing team on a program, or on a research project for Housing First for Youth. And then I worked there in Aura, which is their LGBTQ2S+ Housing First for Youth program. And I was a housing caseworker. And then I went back and did my master's practicum with them on a different research project on how to support their frontline staff working in the populations that they also exist in. So how do you support Indigenous staff working in Indigenous programs? How do you support queer staff working in queer programs? Because our boundary lines and our support to have those containers needs to be different, because we know everybody, and if we want to be in the community, we have to see our clients at community events, not at work. And so that was a project that I did. Fast forward, I finished my master's, and I've known Nicole for a long time. I've done some work with Dr. Alina Turner, who I actually met at Haven's Way, who was doing a project. That's how I met her, and back in many years ago, she began mentoring me about how to do research and how to be in academia as I was going through my schooling. So I've had a lot of opportunity to work in youth homelessness, and as a researcher, I believe that is just storytelling and story collection, and some of us do it ethically and some of us don't, but we all, at the end of the day, are storytellers and story collectors. And so that's what I've learned to do over the years. And so when I came to the project, I don't remember who asked me, to be really honest with you, so I can't say that when Katrina calls, I didn't know Katrina. I said yes to somebody else. Maybe it was Nicole. Anyway, that's partly why I came here. This is one of the last projects I have worked that's still in my work that centers around homelessness and youth homelessness. I have moved into different worlds and sectors, not that they don't overlap with each other, but I have moved into different spaces outside of homelessness. But for some reason, I keep ending up here. So here I am.
Thank you, Elijah and everyone. Our next sort of proposed question is, what do you think are the strengths of the project? Anyone can sort of jump on in.
I think this project has a really diverse research team in terms of lived experience, both coming from the researchers and from the Youth Advisory Committee that Elijah works with, and also a mix of people who come from academia and the frontline work. And so these kind of mashup of experiences create a really broad knowledge base about the topic and about the different experiences that the youth are talking about, and also allows us to approach this research from many different perspectives that kind of widens the lens of the project a little bit.
Sorry, I was writing down your notes because did I throw you off?
Yeah,
No.
a little bit.
Sorry. I'll jump on in because what Megan was saying really resonated with me, and I think it's holistic with a W. And just to go back to what Elder Rod said at the beginning, and so I think that's, it's anchored in community. It's predicated on the principles of mutuality, respect, relationality, and authentic partnership, really. And it's holistic, which I think is probably one of the biggest strengths, but also one of the biggest challenges to sort of live up to that as well and honor that.
Yeah, I think it's been really fun and meaningful to navigate appropriate ways of building connections as researchers beyond being a researcher. And I think that is a strength of this project, that we go to Avenue 15, which is the only youth emergency shelter in Calgary, and I get to sit, beyond doing my interviews, and there's semi-structured interviews, we can have chats there, but beyond that, I get to sit with youth and chat with them about the dates that they're going on and what they're gonna have for dinner and their dog and whatever. And I just think that that's really, really important in community work, is to build relationships, build trust, build connections beyond someone from the university coming in and extracting knowledge. And what does that look like authentically too? I know I'm getting married in August, and we're gonna repurpose all of our flowers from our wedding and bring them all to Avenue 15 the next day to just, bring some light into the shelter. And I think that's a really cool thing to do, or to sit with youth and maybe just, I guess, make your interviews a little bit less formal. Especially when you're interviewing youth who are experiencing homelessness, they don't necessarily want you to sound like someone from the university. If I'll, drop a little PG-13 swear word every now and then just to show that I'm cool, and then all of a sudden that kind of changes the whole way that the direction of the interview is going. So I think that's been a really big strength of this project too.
Yeah. And just building off of what you were saying, I think when research is predicated on these micro moments, it turns into relationship and it turns into trust, and then it really mitigates the potential. It really mitigates the drive-by research or the extractive research that can occur, because you are anchored there and you care about not only the participants but also the staff who support them.
For me, like I mentioned, I got to be a research participant with one of Dr. Alina Turner's projects many years ago, and sat down in Mount Royal. She met me in school, and I got to tell her some of my story. And from there, we began a relationship. The project ended, she wrote her report, life goes on, but she stayed in relationship to me as I continued through my journey, as I continued doing different educational degrees and programs and coming in and out of homelessness that entire 9 years of school. And so when I think about that, and then I get to come into this project, I do think one of the strengths that I've experienced and that I also am seeing translate to the other lived experience experts that I get to work with and be in conversation with is the honor and the professionalism that we are also treated with. That when we show up to do work, we get paid on time. We get paid right away. When we say, is there complimentary parking? Yeah, I'll meet you outside. We don't have to, there's a lot of things that may be taken for granted, but as lived experience experts who are still actively experiencing homelessness or recently exited homelessness. Like some of the youth that show up, they're meeting with me outside of shelters. They're meeting with me from the streets, and they're coming to say like, no, I want this to be different. And so to be able to pay them on time, to be able to honor their stories and give them opportunities, and some of them want to go to university and are in their own educational degrees, undergrads and master's programs, or trying to finish grade 12 to get into university. Like all of these parts of us as real people living the experience that we're researching is, I feel, being honored in a way that I have not always experienced in different projects and in different institutions. So I'm very grateful for Alina for teaching me that, and that I can also gift that to the other experts that I get to work with, and that this project does take those things into consideration. And yeah, it's the professionalism for the lived experience that is a strength.
100%. Thank you, Elijah. The next question sort of pertains to the potential challenges of collaborative community-based research. What have been some of the harder aspects to the project?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is this is a project on youth shelter diversion. So essentially, how do we divert youth away from shelter, as Katrina was saying, to ultimately prevent homelessness? And that's really hard from a research point of view because it's hard to measure something that doesn't happen. If you divert someone away from shelter, you can't necessarily measure that, right? And so that's been definitely a challenge at a community level, and even following up with youth. If they've been diverted away from shelter, maybe they don't have a phone, maybe they're with someone new, so you call who they were diverted to, and then they're no longer there. So purely from a research point of view, I think that that's definitely been a challenge, but it's also been really interesting to navigate, like, what does shelter diversion mean and how are we measuring it? I was interviewing a mom the other day, and she was saying how she went to the emergency room with her kid because, you know, they were struggling, and they were actually told to go to the emergency shelter, the Avenue 15. That was what the physician recommended, which is the opposite of shelter diversion. But, you know, so she was telling me about this, and this had happened like the day before, and mom was a nurse, and she was like, I don't think that that's the right thing to do, and I'm interviewing her, and I was like, no, that's not the right thing to do, like, let's try to brainstorm other things. And, you know, I put her in contact with some other people to talk with, and so after I hung up, I was like, that was just shelter diversion, what just happened too. So I think measuring all of these different things has been a challenge, but also very enlightening as well.
We talked about this last week as a group. We were talking about this, and kind of coming to that, building off what Claire had said, we need the collaboration, and are we actually trying to do something, like deal with an issue that should be dealt with long before you actually, if you get to the shelter to be diverted, you failed. Because now you're going to the shelter to be diverted. You're in the shelter. Whether you stay there or not is one thing. And so even just like our conversation that the four of us got to have of, no, shelter diversion needs to start with education and with doctors, with nurses in the hospitals, in the mental health programs, in the schools. And yeah, so we had a really interesting conversation of just the challenges of doing this project and being limited to like one part of the line when we're actually the end of the line by that point. And so how do we divert with all of these other places, right? So I thought that was an interesting conversation that we all got to have earlier.
I think to add on to that, one of the other challenges that we're facing is even defining what does diversion mean? Trellis's definition is wildly different than Wyndham House, which is one of our partners in Ontario, and they're very different than the Raft, which is another partner. And so how do we find participants through these diversion programs when the parameters that we put around what diversion is so different, agency to agency, city to city, even worker to worker within the same agency. Different programs, even within Trellis, have different definitions of what diversion means. And so trying to find this unified definition has been a challenge because, like we said, like Elijah said, we're trying to measure something, but we're at the end of the line. And, you know, is diversion a day in shelter? Is a diversion a month in shelter? What does that actually look like?
Yeah, just building off of what both of you two are, sorry, I always take notes when you're writing, and I feel like I'm throwing you off, but I think the two biggest, perhaps, lessons that we're sort of taking forward is this sort of macro systems. We need better communication, integration, I don't know what that looks like, between health, justice, child welfare, and housing. And I know that there's so much amazing work happening in community, but just those communication mechanisms, and just to understand that diversion is more than a program, it's a philosophical paradigm, it's how you think about those interactions in hospital, and just thinking more broadly about the ramifications of just dropping off a youth in crisis at a shelter. And then the next piece, once again, was that timeline and that definition piece. And I think we're we like to put things in a box and we like to categorize and in order to understand and explore their meaning. And when there's different timelines associated with all these different programs, it's challenging to understand. We're trying to do a good job of distilling the core elements to shelter diversion in order for it to be generalizable and to create a relevant but a meaningful program model across Canada. But it's proving difficult when there are all these timelines. No. Sorry, I just got to start Q&A thing. Okay. Well, I would like to chat about the hopes and dreams of the project. Okay, sorry. We can just do like a one-liner each, really, really quick.
I mean, kind of just what Caitlin said is like a holistic, generalizable program model for shelter diversion across Canada, which is what you already said.
And I hope that shelter diversion can be implemented at a national level and funded to scale in order to make a population level impact.
Yeah, I hope that we can explore the way different systems, the medical system, the housing system, justice system, can work together to prevent homelessness before it starts.
A one-liner? That's not fair.
Sorry, Elijah. Pressure's on. Maybe 2 or 3.
Like it's been said, this needs to go beyond just the shelter system. And I just think about all of the other Indigenous, queer, and trans young people, especially as things get more violent for people like me and the kids coming after me, the next generations. I just want us to be safe to go to the bathroom and go to school. So that's what I hope this contributes to.
Hear, hear. Thank you. Okay, Q&A.
I'm assuming that it's going to work the same way as the last one.
Yeah.
Great. There's a hand.
Oh, it's a race to get to you first.
Hi, thank you. My name is Jacqueline, and I work with Group 23 Sports Medicine, which is a far cry from where I started out in life. So I do want to say to Caitlin, thank you for sharing your story, because when we have those stories, it makes everybody a little bit more open with sharing theirs. So be brave and keep sharing.
Thank you.
I wanted to share my experience in homelessness, and it started because I was leaving domestic violence in my parents' home, and I was living in a rural community where there are no supports for individuals. And so when you think about diverting children and youth ending up in shelters, how are we addressing or how are we researching those individuals in rural and remote communities? Because I had an internal drive that is just odd. I don't know where it came from, but I knew I wanted better than what I had, so I had to do something different. And so I created my own networks and created my own way of managing episodic homelessness for 4 years by couch surfing and just staying with friends and all that fun stuff so I could get through university and high school. And I did that graduating with honors and with scholarships to go to university while homeless. And so there's a lot of things that we can do for people, but I think we're missing it because by the time youth get to urban centers and fall on the shelter steps, we've already missed something. So how can we research and touch those young people in their communities? Because if I had left my community, I wouldn't have graduated high school, I wouldn't have gone to university, and I wouldn't have a career today.
That's a great question.
Yeah. I'm just reflecting.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
And well done on all you've accomplished.
Yeah.
I'm just registering your story and your journey. I think one of our community partners is a youth shelter based in Kelowna, and I think that although Kelowna is an urban center, I think it's situated, rural. There's a lot of rural neighboring communities, and I think that is that's been coming out in my staff interviews, at least, in terms of how do we support. There's this urban versus rural divide because if we are diverting to family and natural supports in rural communities, there's not as many resources and supports there. And so how are we setting up young people for success? And that's, I don't have the answer to that, but that is a theme that's coming up. So we will, I think that's, it's on our radar.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't know if this is an answer to research, but just hearing your story and also having my own story of episodic homelessness through my education in university, having the lessons and the skills to participate in community and be in community saved my life. And all of the skills I learned and all of the programs and all of the treatments and all of the whatever mental health things, the thing that stands out to me when I reflect on that, listening to your story, is somebody taught me how to participate in community. Mm-hmm. And so I was diverted from shelter, but I was homeless every single time. Mm-hmm. And so what saved my life was being able to participate in community. And as an Indigenous person, we are participating in that, healing our community, being a village for each other. We support each other, we show up for each other. If I can teach the young people that I work with how to be a part of community, so when the systems inevitably fail them, because that's where we're at right now, that they still know how to participate in community in a good way. And so I don't know if that's an answer, but that's what I heard coming up.
I mean, that was so good. The only thing I was going to say, which is, I mean, I feel like obvious with issues like this, is just we need more funding and we need it to be allocated appropriately. I know I've spoken to a lot of caseworkers in Northern Alberta who have diverted youth, not even diverted, but youth don't want to be in their house anymore, and they've sent them to Calgary, to the emergency shelter in Calgary, to homelessness. And the caseworker, I think, understands what Avenue 15 is, but also maybe doesn't. And I think more conversation between communities, provincially and nationally. And then also, I mean, again, as everything, it's just like we need more money and we need it to be dispersed appropriately by people who understand what the issues are.
Next question?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ashraf. I'm actually here today on behalf of Oil Spring, Alberta. Oil Spring, Alberta provide support, psychosocial support to cancer patients and their caregivers. So I have a quick question for you guys. So that's a fascinating project. I really like that one. So I have a quick question about what are some of the important social determinants of health you have identified in terms of addressing homelessness. So homelessness is one issue, but you might have multiple factors, contributing factor to that. So we know those are mostly structural factors. So how we will address that? And my first question is, what kind of social determinants of health you have found in your project, and how you are going to address that? That's my question. Thank you.
Can you say it again? Please, just the question part.
These social determinants of health we have. So homelessness is consequences of course, some of those kind of social determinants of health. If you have identified any of those.
Thank you.
I think the most prominent social determinant of health that I have seen in interviewing youth and their families is mental health. And also, I think it's really interesting to think of the healthcare system itself as a social determinant of health. I've seen a lot of youth and families who have been diverted or directed to shelter, to homelessness from the healthcare system. Often the hospitals will be a form of shelter for people. And so I do think that socially, the healthcare system can be a make or break for determining health socially for people. But yeah, I would say mental health, especially for youth. I know that they're not, they cannot get a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder if you're under 18. And I know that's been that's been a problem for a lot of youth who I've interviewed, where either themselves or their families say, I think that this is my problem, but I can't get a diagnosis. And so I can't get admitted to, certain programs or psychiatric programs. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, I will kind of tie it back to what we talked about in the last question. I think something that's coming up for me is the difference between, in terms of our initial interviews and then follow-up interviews, is the ones who are successfully diverted from shelters are people who have access to community and who have those community building skills. Because the youth who are able to connect with community that supports them for who they are, whether they're trans or Indigenous, they're Black, they're part of the LGBTQ community, they're disabled, finding people who can support them through the multiple intersecting identities that they hold is a big determinant of whether or not they end up in shelters, in hospitals, versus being supported outside of those places. So I think community social isolation is a big one for that I'm seeing in our research.
Yeah, just dovetailing off of what Megan was saying, I would also add family and natural supports. The majority of the interviews that I've completed have been with staff, so not necessarily young people per se, but the folks who support them. And it's, at least from secondary information, it's a lot of intergenerational homelessness too that's been happening in my conversation, that's been coming up in my conversation. So it's around supporting youth through their communities, but also supporting the families and the family systems through that prevention lens as well.
Should we go on?
Yeah,
great.
You're good?
Yeah.
Anyone
Any other
else?
questions?
Oh.
Hello. Thank you so much for this excellent panel, and I've learned so much today. I'm Sorella Azuelos. I'm with the Knowledge Engagement Team and Research Services. And I just had a question for, I think it was Megan who mentioned a youth advisory committee or council. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what role they played in the design or the collection or the analysis of the work that you're doing on this research project.
I'll take it. That's me. Megan did mention it, but I am the Youth Advisory Committee coordinator, and yeah, do all the work with the lived experience experts. I'm kind of the bridge between the committee and the rest of the research team. So I meet with the committee, and then I take what we've talked about and go back to the research team, and then vice versa. And it's really interesting to recruit youth over Zoom across the country, who some are currently homeless and some are further along in their exiting homelessness journey. So I think just navigating the logistics of it has been a challenge, and I'm also, I can't remember what the other part of your question, how you worded it, but going back to what I said about one of the strengths, being able to advocate for the Youth Advisory Committee and then go back to the research team and say like, hey, so this is what we talked about. A big conversation over the summer was consent for participating in the research project, but also then being a service user, and how many times do you use consent to something because they need the honorarium to eat, or they need the honorarium to pay their phone, or whatever it is. Or yes, I'll participate in that program even though they actually don't want to consent, but it's cold outside. And so that's been a really interesting conversation we were able to bring back to the research team, of just like consent to programming and consent to even participating in the research project. So yeah, that was some of what we've learned so far and been able to impact.
Yeah, I would say having the Youth Advisory Committee, at least from the more research side of it, has been really important because it helps us center our research around their experiences and make sure that the questions we're asking, the consent forms that we're using, are centered around what is going on for these youth and is trauma informed in our lens, and making sure that we're not asking too much of youth or expecting too much of youth. It helps us embed our research within the community instead of us coming in as outsiders. Yeah.
A big part of my job is knowing when to get out of the way, and I definitely needed to get out of the way of that conversation. Thank you, all four of you, for sharing your experiences. Really appreciate it. Maybe just another thanks for their participation. There's a few people in the audience who are holding my feet to the fire a little bit around the next steps and what all of this means and how do we sort of honor and value your contributions today. And so we will. So that's sort of my promise back to you. We're going to go through all of this information. We're going to pull it all together, and we'll report back to you on what everything was said. But I just was having a conversation with some of my community friends who said, so what, Katrina? You have to do something with this, and you have to mobilize this work into something that is action-focused. And so we actually talked about potentially a follow-up conversation with anybody who wants to, which would be really to take what we heard today and create a very tangible action plan for what the O'Brien Institute is going to do, what we can promise to do in terms of follow-up through our institute, but also through the university. And so I'm going to chew on that. And I will, you will hear from us if there is anybody who wants to, take the next step with us around the action-focused piece of this work. I will say, philosophically and through discourse and dialogue, the University of Calgary is moving to be an impact-focused university, a research impact-focused university. Part of my job in my new role will be to do whatever I can to actually be good to that promise. And so we're seeing it in things like grant applications where funders want to say, okay, so what, Katrina, this is a fantastic project. So what? What are you going to do about it? So that's really one of the big lessons that I'm going to take away today in terms of your contributions so far, and there will be others as well. So you will hear from us. I will say it probably won't be till the new year as we pull all of this together. I also just noticed that we are actually the Heath Equity Hub, not the Health Equity Hub. So I'm not sure who Heath is, but hopefully he's here or she is here, and maybe they can help us with the action items for this work moving forward. I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for sticking around. I know staying after lunch and having these conversations, people get really tired. It's super hot in here. But maybe you looked outside and saw what's going on out there, and that was part of the reason why you stayed. Whatever the reason was, thank you very much to all of you. We will pay attention to what was said here today. I promise you that. Okay, sorry, I have to go back to my notes because there's probably some things I need to say to wrap things up that I have forgotten about. The The last thing I would say is our poster presentations. We did have judges go around and pick 3 winners, which I love, but it also makes me sad because I'm the mom that wants to give everybody the participation badges. I am. My husband says it's a weakness. I don't think it's a weakness. I think everybody should be valued. Ooh, yuck. Where's that word cloud? Oh my God. Okay, so I don't know if you had a chance to look at the word cloud. I just briefly saw it, and I think justice was one of the big words. And actually, for me, when we talk about EDI, when we talk about equity, the justice piece is the action piece for me. So I'm really excited that the word justice really came forward in a big way. So, okay, without further ado, our poster winners. Thank you again to our judges. If our judges are still here, do you mind just giving a wave? I think Anna's still here. Melanie is still here. Karen is still here. Kaneen, I guess, has left. Anyway, thank you. We had 20 or so contributions, which was fantastic. And yes, now I have to say who the winners are. So number 3, Batu Al-Musawi. Are you here? Fantastic. Oh, I should say, yes, please stand up so everyone can see you. We will be following up with prizes. So we will be in touch with you, and we will make sure that you get your prize. So I promise. And Dr. Osei Tutu is who you're working with. Is that correct? No? Oh, he was the judge. Okay. So your project was around setting priorities for EDI and accessibility at Canadian Medical School learners' perspectives. So fantastic work, and congratulations. Thank you. Thank you very much. Number 2, near and dear to my heart, Yang Yang, are you here? Yang Yang. Yang Yang Fang. And is Tiffany is still here? Joanna still here? Okay. Well, you are here. Transforming mental health support, examining the role of radical mental health doulas. So congratulations for number 2. Number 1, Ben Antipim. Did I say that right? Ben, we know each other. Where are you? Yeah. Congratulations. I don't think I would have had the same experience if I had been white, exploring staff experiences of racism at a Canadian Children's Hospital. Hopefully not ours. So congratulations. We will follow up with your prizes. A huge thank you to, again, all of our students and trainees who brought your amazing work forward. Thank you so much. Okay, that's it. That's everything. Thank you again. I hope it was a good use of your time. I did get to ask that of a few people, and the responses were positive. We probably will follow up with a survey, the typical evaluation survey. If you want to give us some feedback, please be honest and transparent with your feedback, because it helps us to learn when we do these events in the future. So thank you all very much for coming, and safe travels as you head out into the snowstorm. Thank you.